The very first time I started a business, I was just 17 years old and I made $20,000 in 3 months profit. Now, it wasn't some huge organization with hundreds of employees. It was just me and one of my friends from school. It was quite simple. We were selling little bracelet accessories for $30, which cost us about 20 cents to produce. Now, this was my first business and I made so many mistakes. It's actually quite funny when I look back on it. And as I mentioned just earlier, we'd made about $20,000 in profit after running it for about 3 months, which to me at the time was the treasure chest. I had never seen that type of money before. But the thing is, this was my first rodeo at running a business. And I hadn't really educated myself too much on the business world at this stage. After all, I was still at school and it honestly started off as more of a hobby than an actual business. And my pitfall was naively only thinking about the short term and not the long term. And this is why this business, it inevitably had to shut down forever. And today, I'm going to show you how to truly switch your mind to a billionaire's viewpoint and show you a mindset that has generated me tens of millions of dollars online at just 28 years old. So let's get started. You need to be thinking in the long term for success in business, not just the short term and trying to make a quick buck. Sure, it might work, but it will never last. So to really drive in this point to start with on this video, I'm going to give you one of the first ever examples of where I personally found a reasonable level of success, but it backfired on me severely because I had short-term thinking and not long-term thinking. So, about 5 years ago, I was running a different dropshipping business whilst I was still at university. This time, I was selling dog beds rather than fashion bracelets. Here's how it all went rising up and then how it all came crashing down. The first source of information I learned dropshipping from essentially had me doing product research within the first 2 minutes of getting started. There was no foundational work whatsoever. I knew the what to do, but not the why to do it. And this was a huge mistake. I only stuck to dropshipping rather than looking at starting a proper business. I did not learn about revenue optimization or conversion rate optimization or email marketing and thousands of other things I just did not know about. Here's essentially what happened. I did some product research, found a product I thought would be good. I knew a little bit about copywriting at this stage, so I wrote some reasonable sales copy on the website, wrote a bit of a script, and made a few ads with a friend of mine with a dog just playing around in the dog bed, right? It was pretty simple. And once it was all ready, I launched it into the market with Facebook ads. I'd just bought a house at this point, so I was completely tapped for all income. I did not have pretty much anything left at all to spend in this business. I started with ads at about $100 or $200 a day, and I actually started making a good return from practically day one. Within the first week, I was making a bit over $6,000 a week in revenue, and after all of the costs of product fulfillment and advertising, I was left with about $2,000 for the week in profit. And at this stage, I literally thought I was the king. If I'd sustained this, I would have been making more income than I would have been making at my 7-year university degree to become an engineer, right? And it only took me 2 weeks to get this business set up. Anyway, after these 2 months, I'd made about $40,000 in profit, but something huge backfired on me. This business was started in around January or February 2020, and you'll see why this matters in a moment. The first of 2 mistakes was that I was all focused on marketing and sales. I did not care about operations because China was handling that, and who cares if the product had some complaints? I did not care because I had short-term thinking, not long-term thinking. Now, the second mistake, I didn't really care about the long shipping times either. The customer would get their product eventually, right? I was delivering the product I promised, so once again, I did not care that it took them like 3 or 4 weeks to get their dog bed. All that I really cared about was the money was coming in, I was making profit, so all that other stuff going wrong, I wasn't thinking in the long term, I did not care. Where it all came crashing down, if you recall, I started this business early 2020, and this was during the start of the pandemic. Shipping stopped. Many customers did not receive their orders, and to cut a long story short, I had to shut down the business and refund every single dollar of profit I'd made, plus some. So I'd actually lost money after all of this hard work. That was short-term thinking shooting me in the foot. If I had long-term thinking, on the other hand, The second I started to see some traction, I would have thought about how could I improve the product? How can I decrease shipping times? I likely would have beat this difficulty to make a long-term business, but I was thinking in the short term, and this is what shot me in the foot. Now, this is obviously an example about e-commerce, but it does apply to all types of businesses. So now the question might be asked, how do you actually start having long-term thinking? This gets us into the good part of this video where I'll be talking about second order consequences and first principles thinking. Second order consequences and time. The one variable that not many entrepreneurs account for is time. The number one cause of business failure is time. Almost everything to do with business and life is time. And short-term thinking is essentially the human brain looking for a hit of dopamine from instant gratification, such as profiting 1K a day within the first few weeks of starting a new business, as I mentioned a couple minutes ago. The truth, however, is that there is an inverse relationship between benefit and time with these sorts of things. And in case you didn't know what dopamine is, it's just a neurotransmitter in your brain which makes you feel pleasure for a short period of time, usually for doing bad things, like for example eating junk food. You feel good for a few minutes, then you feel like crap. Another example is getting a bunch of likes on something you posted on Instagram. It's no good for you. It's just your brain's primitive way of providing you with a reward for doing something. A few other examples of this is sitting on the couch watching Netflix for 10 hours straight. Or the worst version, taking types of drugs which release a lot of dopamine, which leads to addiction. Short-term thinking is essentially wanting to have a better today at the cost of tomorrow. Lots of things that give a dopamine hit are good for now, but bad for later, which really isn't using the compound effect to its fullest advantage. In fact, it's reversing it. And your business and life is really just the sum total of a bunch of smaller decisions, nothing else. And most of these decisions always have two routes, one for a short-term benefit and one for a long-term benefit. And winners always think in the long term. The unfortunate thing about dopamine is that it has a negative instant gratification feedback loop. Now that's a lot of words, so let me explain. You do something beneficial short term, negative long term. It feels good, so the next time you have this binary option, you repeat the mistake over and over again. It reinforces itself until this is your brain's natural state of being. It becomes a habitual pattern to get this way, and this is why most humans fail, by the way, especially those who are actively unaware of this phenomenon. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these two variables have an inverse relationship. If you go to the gym now, it usually doesn't feel great to start, but the second order consequence that it leads to more energy and less illness in the future. If you eat healthy now, it usually doesn't feel great to start, but the second order consequence is that it leads to more energy and enjoying healthier foods. If you read a book rather than watching Netflix, it doesn't necessarily provide as much entertainment, but the positive impact of knowledge will benefit you in the future. And I could keep going on and on and on with examples, but I'm sure you understand the point by now. The more you do things which provide delayed gratification rather than instant gratification, the better. Dopamine spikes are evil for your brain and terrible for your success. Opting for this is essentially long-term thinking in practice. If you can master this habit and practice long-term thinking, you are already 99% ahead of your competition. All of what I just spoke about, it kind of sounds like theory, but there's actually been deep research into this topic. So there's this well-documented experiment called the marshmallow experiment that scientifically proves that if you are looking for achievement, too much dopamine is bad for you. Researchers gathered a group of young children around 5 years old and presented them with two options. Option 1 was that they had one marshmallow and could eat it right now. Option 2 was that if they waited for an undisclosed period of time, they would have 2 marshmallows to eat, also known as delayed gratification. And the outcome was that the majority of these children chose option 1, short-term gratification, and the minority selected option 2. And these initial findings are really not that surprising if you observe the greater population. However, here is the interesting part. These children were tracked for the rest of their life. They were measured in terms of a bunch of different quantitative metrics: financial success, health, well-being, happiness, family, etc. And from measuring these metrics, the researchers came to a profound conclusion. The children that chose option 2 all overwhelmingly scored higher in every single metric. They literally did this experiment and took notes for their entire lifetime. It wasn't just 5 years later or something, it literally went for their entire life. So if you apply this doctrine into your worldview, into your habits, and into your heuristics of decision making, in essence, your personal patterning, you will scientifically proven have a more successful life. So 99.99% of people do not understand the true impact of second order consequences. When we make a decision, something happens and things change, but those actions create reactions, and those reactions create actions, which create reactions, and it engages in this feedback loop on itself and becomes exponential. It goes on to third order consequences, fourth order consequences, all the way up to infinity order consequences. And the picture here up on the screen explains this perfectly. One little action knocks down a bigger domino to a bigger one to a bigger one. A small positive thing now results in a huge positive later, and a small negative now potentially results in a huge negative down the line as well. Now, the best business operators are extremely good at spotting this. They do not have negative death spirals, instead only positive spirals upwards, not down. To finish off this discussion, I want to talk about another point to assist you with how you can positively impact yourself in the long term, understanding the principle of decision fatigue in depth. What is decision fatigue? The more decisions you need to make in your day, the worse the quality of each decision. Let's say you're awake for 16 hours a day and you make 100 decisions each hour. That's a lot of decisions to make. Do you think your brain can process the information and synthesize the best choice if it's doing all of this active thinking? Of course not. So the best business owners will intentionally architect their personal life and their business life so that they minimize the quantity of decisions that they make, so that they can maximize the quality of this smaller amount of decisions. And some examples of this are clothing to wear, food to eat, certain daily routines in your day. You want to routinize these things so that you aren't spending that valuable brain resource of decision making on pointless activities. I'm honestly not shocked in the slightest whenever I observe people whose natural state is just doing stuff and deciding on things that don't really matter. I always observe that those people who do that, their life is in the exact same state. It is always chaotic. It is never in order, and they usually never have any grand achievements in their life. Now, I'm not suggesting by any means that you become a human robot, of course not. However, I do challenge you to think about areas of your own life where second order consequences are working against you rather than for you. And this will serve you in the long term, and hopefully it's clear by now that by opting for the long term, it will have a positive effect on your life personally, and also this will carry on to your business as well. The final point on this video that I'll talk about, it kind of all links it together. It's a concept known as the effect horizon. So whenever you're making a critical decision, take note of the effect horizon. Let's look at a quick diagram. We have two options for explanation. On the vertical axis here, we've got the upside and the downside, and on the horizontal axis, we have time. If we look at option A, you can see what instant gratification looks like. The stupid decision of, for example, buying the plasma screen TV with debt as mentioned earlier. Option B, on the other hand, is long-term thinking and delayed gratification. At the start, it usually always sucks a little bit, but in the long term, it is hugely beneficial. And you can see in the long term, there's huge upside, whereas with option A, there is huge downside the longer you go. There you have it. That is my distilled thoughts on why long-term thinking is better than short-term thinking. Short-term wins might seem sweet, but my journey in business has taught me the hard way that long-term thinking is the real game changer. When I transitioned from short-term thinking to long-term thinking, I went from running businesses which lasted less than 6 months and maybe making me an average salary to operating a business which consistently produces me millions of dollars per month with literally hundreds of employees helping me run this business. Now, remember back to the start of this video where I talked about that bracelet side hustle I had in high school. I made a quick 20K, but guess what? Lack of foresight and education on the business front led it straight to the gutter. Ditch that short-term dopamine hit, think beyond the now, think about the future, and hey, simplify the decisions to beat decision fatigue and simplify your life so that you can make quality decisions. It's not about being a robot, it's just about making the correct moves for long-term success. What I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna finish off this video with a quick quote, and this one will surely resonate with you and sums up the video cleanly. Long-term thinking and action is almost always harder, but more rewarding. Climbing the hill is almost always better than taking the electric wheelchair. So with that being said, take action on what you've learned today, and more importantly, let me know in the comments section the biggest realization you took from this video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you're looking for an untapped blue ocean business model which actually integrates long-term thinking, which I grew to $3 million in revenue in just 90 days of getting started, make sure to check out the video here in the top of the screen, which is also in the description section down below. So with that out of the way, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. To your success.